Cool. All right, well, thank you for coming. So this is a personal story, my experience over the last 5 or so years starting a business. When it comes to starting a business, Silicon Valley is kind of a special place. You can start a successful business anywhere in the world, but no other place has the home of Google, Apple, Facebook, Tesla, and Netflix. Startup accelerators like Y Combinator and 500 Startups seek out new and perhaps inexperienced talent and give them the money and guidance they need to serve billion-dollar markets. Angel investors rich on the Silicon Valley gold rush try their hand at investment, writing $50,000 checks in the coffee shops of Palo Alto, the birthplace of the personal computer. Stanford University pushes out some of the world's most talented minds, and nearby Sand Hill Road feeds them cash and from billion-dollar venture capital funds. Silicon Valley is the place where Mark Zuckerberg, a college dropout, was given $500,000 to continue development on a website that made no money. Zuckerberg, who is the same age as I am, is now worth $70 billion. I grew up just 45 minutes from Silicon Valley, in a small town in the Santa Cruz Mountains called Ben Lomond. My father was an electrical engineer from Lockheed Missiles and Space, whose first job out of college was developing guidance systems for rockets at Vandenberg Air Force Base. When I was 2 years old, he was transferred from their Sunnyvale facility, and one of my earliest memories was my 3rd birthday at a hotel in the mountain town I would call my home for almost 20 years. Ben Lomond is a town filled with 1,000-year-old redwood trees that tower above you at 100 meters tall. The trees draw in so much fog and rain from the ocean that the valley I lived in is considered a temperate rainforest. When I was very young, my parents separated, and I spent my childhood safe at home while my mom worked. I remember always the rainfall through the picture window. The nearby university focuses on environmental protection, and I was raised with an appreciation for our earth and all that it provides. When I was 4 years old, I told my parents I wanted to be an inventor. At age 5, I took the film winding motor from an old camera and added it to a plastic toy car. Perhaps my first invention. As I got a little older, my engineer father began to insist inventor isn't a job. And so at age 11, when I watched a show on robotics on the Learning Channel, I knew that at that moment I wanted to run my own robotics company. I've been hell-bent on it ever since. When the search for college came around, I found a school close to home that had a great robotics program, Santa Clara University, and finally landed myself in Silicon Valley. I didn't know it at the time, but I'd be living there for 15 more years and counting. In college, I started to notice other businesses people had founded, where they were able to work on their dreams. SparkFun Electronics sold open source gadgets for hobbyists. I was amazed when, after 8 or so years in business, they shared a plot of their year-over-year revenue figures since their founding. They had doubled in size every year until they were doing $30 million in sales annually. I've always been smart and confident in myself, so I felt strongly that if others could do this, so could I. I would eventually drop out of college. I was more interested in staying at home and building robots than going to class. And I worked for 7 years doing mechanical design and manufacturing at a small engineering shop in the area. It was during my time in that position that I really started to experiment with engineering at home on my own time. I was learning some wonderful skills at my day job, and I wanted to apply them to something interesting. I started to learn electronic design at home. I spent evenings reading tutorials online and using free software to design LED lighting for my home office, long before you could buy LED lighting at the corner store. I learned how to read manufacturers' data sheets and turn specifications and diagrams into functional designs. I ordered circuit boards from China and learned surface mount soldering at home. All the while, my goal was to learn every facet of robotics. I did mechanical design at work, electronics at home, and started to dabble in more advanced software as well. Eventually, I started to put it all together. After several years doing design and manufacturing at my day job, I started to work on software projects there too. I designed a tablet computer from scratch and integrated electrical components from different vendors to make it a reality. I put together a touch panel over an LCD screen, found a single board computer I could program, designed a case for the whole system, and wrote all the software for it. At home, I started exploring the design of custom brushless linear motors, devices with one moving part that turn electrical energy into linear motion. I designed the electronics, wrote the software, and machined the mechanicals. I even made the electric motor winder out of an old drill motor and a beer bottle. After 7 years at my day job, I was itching for something new. Finally, I found a famous speech from Steve Jobs, his Stanford commencement speech, that said roughly, "If you wake up every day and you don't like what you're going to do, then go out and change it. The world is not run by special people, somehow more capable than most, but regular people no smarter than you or I, who found themselves at the right place at the right time. If you're not happy with your life, then don't keep doing it. Find your passion and follow it." I knew that the job I was working at, mechanical engineer at an industrial tool supplier, was not my passion. I wake up every day and I see a world that could be made better with robots. I see people going to work doing things they don't want to do, and I see how we could make robots to help them. So I quit. I had no plan and no money. It was probably a bad idea, but somehow it worked out. My employer didn't want to lose me, and we worked out a deal where I would agree to stay full-time for a few more months, and then stay on 1 day a week for another year while receiving my full salary. Honestly, I feel guilty for that. It doesn't seem like a fair deal to my boss, but it was his company, and it seems he wanted me. I'm still indebted both figuratively and literally for all the help he gave me while we worked together. But I got my chance. I wanted to form a company around the linear motors I was developing. I didn't know anything about how to run a business. People asked me what my business plan was, and I said, make hardware and sell it. What I would make exactly, and who I would sell it to, or why they would buy it from me, were questions I had no answer to and no strong motivation to answer. I spent months designing new hardware, winding motors, writing software simulations, designing new PCBs, 3D printing housings, machining aluminum, and making calibration fixtures. I went to a trade show and set up a booth, and people loved what I was trying to build. After pouring months into the project, I was scarcely closer to production than I was when I began. I had a fabulous prototype, but not a product. I didn't even understand the distinction at the time. But this is Silicon Valley, a place flooded with investments and all kinds of crazy ideas. Mobile apps were all the rage, but there exists a small faction of engineers and startups in the area that are focused on making hardware. I regularly took my prototypes to the hardware startup meetups and was looking for any investment I could find. I made friends who had gone through Stanford Business School who tried to tell me I was asking for too much money and lacked a solid business plan. I wanted $500,000 of investment, and I was the only employee. Eventually, I would learn the hard way that the money doesn't come that easy. I had been reading TechCrunch, a Valley blog focused on the goings-on of investment in the tech world, and all the stories of success led me to believe that anyone with an idea could find investment. But my product was complex. I had no market, and I had no team. I was working with a friend for a little while on the project, a seasoned embedded engineer 20 years my senior, who normally worked for rates I could never afford, but enjoyed working with me enough to work for free as a business partner. I was too controlling, too overbearing. I argued with him. It stopped being fun for him, and he politely informed me he would no longer keep working with me. I rushed him because I wanted to build a product demo, but he wanted to build something reliable. I wish I had let him work. The good news is we're still friends. Around the time I was doing all this, the Facebook movie came out. As I mentioned, Mark Zuckerberg is one of Silicon Valley's success stories, and the dramatic retelling of his story made the startup life look irresistible. This college dropout spent his evenings drinking beer and working at his computer, just like me, and soon a Silicon Valley venture capital firm was writing him a check for $500,000. I had no idea how far I was from where he had been, but all the stories of success from TechCrunch, the Accelerator, Y Combinator, and the Facebook movie combined and fed into my fantasies that somehow, through sheer will and my own brain power, I could achieve success. I could achieve similar success. When I was a kid, my mother always underscored how intelligent I am, and certainly I did well in school. In 8th grade, I got first place in the county math contest and won a graphing calculator as a prize. But I never did meet people as smart as some of the founders I've come across in more recent years. I'm still confident that I'm smart, but I think a dose of humility could have done me well when I was younger. Still, I was convinced I could find my success on the funding circuit in Silicon Valley. But after trying to raise funds for my robotics business for 6 months, I was coming up with nothing. I was running out of money, and my product was plagued with serious problems. The motor didn't move well at low speeds. It would overheat, and the latest electronics design had some unknown flaw that caused boards to fail after just 5 minutes of operation. I had a complicated product that really needed an electrical engineer, a mechanical engineer, and a software engineer just to get it working. Never mind the fact that we had no business person to find customers and help define the product specification. I was running out of money, and I had no customers. Something serious had to change. And so, never one to give up, I did what Silicon Valley calls a pivot. And I had recently added a wireless controller to the robot I was working on and was amazed at how cheap the wireless chips were. In my own experience, adding wireless to a product was expensive and fraught with difficulty. I wondered, if I threw out all the complicated mechanics of my product and just focused on an easy-to-use wireless board for hobbyist products, would that be a simple enough product for me to design myself? Well, it was worth a try. I spent the next 6 months designing prototypes, hardware, software, and tech demos. My girlfriend joined in with me and started writing marketing copy, designing an awesome website, and emailing media contacts who would publicize us when we were ready. We had decided to launch our product on Kickstarter. It was a very busy time. I barely slept. I lost 20 pounds. I got in a fight with my father after he declined my request to borrow money. I found 3 friends who would loan me money to the tune of $10,000 to keep me going when I had totally run out of cash. A week before the launch, I still didn't have a good plan for pricing, so I made it up. I knew I wanted the main board to be $20, even though the final boards weren't designed, so I couldn't get quotes. I guessed on prices for all the accessories too. The project needed a funding goal, the amount that backers have to pledge before you get any money. That's a tricky one. If the amount is too low, you can get too little funding to actually do the work you're planning. Set the goal too high, and it will be difficult to get the money you need. And many people who see a high limit won't even pledge because they don't think it's worth it. I made up the number, $80,000. We knew we wanted to offer accessories for the product, so I came up with a few ideas and put them down. We came up with 5 to 10 different kits people could buy with all this stuff. We had pricing, marketing materials, prototypes, and a cool video we'd produced with a great video producer and media contacts at the ready. Finally, launch came. Thanks to the work of my girlfriend and business partner at the time, we had amazing media coverage on the first day. That Silicon Valley blog I mentioned before, TechCrunch, they had an article on our campaign on the first day, along with Hackaday, QZ, and Hacker News. We did a Reddit AMA. She even got me an interview for a California radio station. We blew past the $80,000 funding goal in just 8 days. By the end of the campaign in September 2013, we'd raised $150,000 from 1,600 backers. This little wireless board sold 4,000 units in just 30 days. This is a day many of us who tinker find ourselves dreaming of. We love to make things, and we dream of one day making something that give us overflowing bank accounts and acclaim from our peers. And with the help of some dedicated friends, I found myself in just that position, and I felt sick to my stomach. We'd been working like crazy for months. With the closing of our campaign, our fate was sealed. We'd made a lot of promises, and now we had to deliver. I had promised delivery in 6 months, but what did I have? I had prototypes. The plan was to redesign the hardware before delivery to use an upgraded processor, a better radio, and a slick design. It would take 18 months before the first hardware was ordered, by which time I'd almost completely run out of money. I had just enough cash to order 1,000 units with no accessories and get them shipped out to backers. I could prove to the world that the product existed, but 3/4 of my customers would have to wait. By this time, I was drinking pretty heavily every night and smoking a lot of weed. As the clock ticked and my cash got closer to zero, I had no idea what I was going to do. I'd only ever had one job in Silicon Valley, and I had to quit it to start a company that didn't work out, only to pivot, run out of money, and then start another company that was going nowhere. I worked as hard as I could, but the stress was killing me. My girlfriend, who had started the company with me, had long since stopped being my business partner. I couldn't afford to pay for her living, and we could never figure out how to work together after the campaign ended. I had been so stressed, I'd stopped being a good romantic partner to her, and eventually she told me she was leaving me. She'd been loaning me rent for 6 months. I never wanted to leave the house, and I was a wreck every day. It hurt more than I can describe, but I don't blame her. I found myself with no money, no girlfriend, and no place to go. That was, and still is, the lowest place I ever got to in my life. But at the same time, I had been looking for work. On a Thursday evening, I went to a local robotics meetup, and I met with someone who ran his own robotics company. They were hiring, and I managed to get an interview the following day. I told him I could only work 3 days a week. I had a business to run, and I needed to figure out how to fund it. Amazingly, He offered to give me a loan to help with that if I would work full-time. And so, as we walked around the neighborhood near the garage his company started in, he agreed to loan me $55,000 in addition to a decent salary if I would start work immediately. I thought about it over the weekend and then reported to work Monday morning. Within a week, he'd written me a check. Retelling this story now has me realizing that perhaps there is more magic in Silicon Valley than I've given it credit for. I was in a very low place, and that offer helped keep my dream alive when I thought it was over. It was now nearly 2 years after my Kickstarter campaign had launched. I had a big lump of cash again and a job to pay my bills. I discovered that the $55,000 loan wasn't enough and convinced my mother to co-sign on another $18,000 loan which she had borrowed against her home. I was finally able to order all the hardware I needed to close out the campaign, and between the back rent I owed my ex and the 2 loans, I was $85,000 in debt. The change in my life was significant. I had to move out of the apartment I'd been living in for 2 years. It was more my ex's place than mine. I was no longer working from home either. I had to show up to work every day. I was working as a software engineer, and while I'd been writing software for 15 years by then, I'd never written a lot of it. I quit drinking alcohol and I quit smoking weed. I started riding my bike and losing weight. I focused on my new job and on my personal health. I didn't do a lot of work for my business, we called it Flutter Wireless, for 6 months or so. Around October 2015, I transferred $61,000 to a bank account in Shenzhen, China. I'd gotten quotes from my manufacturer and was finally ready to order the big batch. I waited months for the product to arrive. The accessories came first, since they were easiest to make. But finally, by March, huge boxes began to show up at my door. Thousands of units of hardware were finally in hand. It was an incredible feeling. Suddenly, I had a new problem. I'd have to ship all this stuff. When I ordered the first 1,000 units, the manufacturer handled all the shipping. But when the new order came around, the manufacturer said they no longer offered shipping services. I'd been working on getting ready for shipment for 2.5 years, but it took so long, I almost never imagined it would happen. I certainly wasn't prepared. But I did some research, found some nice shipping boxes, which were more expensive than I'd like, I should add, and got ready to ship out the first new orders. But then I discovered a problem, a big problem. Flutter Wireless sells wireless boards, little programmable Arduino-like boards with wireless radios on them. You can program the boards to talk to each other, so if you wanted to add sensors to your garden or make a remote-controlled robot, Flutter would have you covered. Only I noticed that a bunch of the boards wouldn't talk to each other. Normally, in any Flutter network, you have one master coordinator device that sets everything up, and then a bunch of slave devices that all synchronize with the master. But I found that I had a bunch of boards that would never synchronize to the master. It should be a pretty simple process. Program one board as a master, program another as a slave, power on the master and the slave, and within 2 seconds, the lights on the slave flashes green to let you know it's connected. Well, I had a bunch of boards that would never connect. The light flashed blue and red to tell me it wasn't connected. I started digging into my software to figure out why this had happened. Eventually, I discovered that different boards had different frequency offsets. Each board has a digital radio chip on it that sends and receives wireless signals. But wireless communications use different frequencies to do different things. And if two devices want to talk to each other, they need to be using the same frequencies. On each board is a little device called a crystal that creates electrical vibrations at a very exact frequency. The software tells the radio chip what frequency to use, and the radio chip uses the crystal as a reference to make sure the frequency is right. But there's no such thing as a perfect crystal. The way they're manufactured determines how accurate they are. Cheaper crystals are less accurate than more expensive ones, as you'd expect. That's why the bill of materials for Flutter specifies a good quality crystal from a good manufacturer. We list one exact part number from one manufacturer as the part you're supposed to use. And after a thorough inspection of my boards, I found that the manufacturer did not use the part I specified. But something else. I emailed pictures of the crystals to the real chip manufacturer and they confirmed. Many of the crystals were fake clones and others were simply parts from a different manufacturer. I emailed the other manufacturer and they couldn't confirm the accuracy of the crystals I had. Flutter communicates using 20 kilohertz wide signals, and some of the crystals had 40 kilohertz of error. When two devices with bad crystals tried to talk to each other, they'd be ever so slightly off, ultimately leaving them on the wrong frequency and totally unable to talk to each other. It would take months to come up with a solution. We found that the errors in frequency did not change with time or temperature. The differences between units were up to manufacturing differences, but whatever error they had would stay that way. There's also an onboard memory on each Flutter board. I worked with a local wireless expert, Earl McCune, who had graciously been helping me on the tough parts of this project for quite some time. He had a super accurate wireless transmitter that we could use to calibrate my boards. So I took 5 radios and measured the error for each one. Then I programmed them to shift their frequencies just a little. So if one was 15 kilohertz too high, I would always subtract 15 kilohertz from the commanded signal. Then I took my 5 adjusted boards and wrote software that would allow someone to take a box of hundreds of boards and quickly calibrate each unit with the same kind of offset. My Chinese manufacturer had a local employee who lived in a nearby town, so I took my 3,000 boards to her house, set up a computer with the calibration program, and she calibrated all 3,000 units for me over a period of weeks. Finally, I had the hardware I'd been working towards. It was now 3 years since the original campaign. The hardware worked, I just had to ship it. I would eventually learn that shipping hardware is a pain too. I had about 1,000 packages to ship, but the customers had all given me their addresses years before. The software I used to track customers was designed to take their address once, but now I needed them to update their addresses. I had no way of knowing who had done so and who hadn't, so I finally ended up manually emailing them to confirm addresses. I had given the customers a lot of kit options, and then to collect more money, I also gave them the option to add in extras. This meant that while about 200 of the orders were the same, most orders had unique options and so had to be stuffed individually. I hadn't planned appropriately for shipping, and doing it myself was slow. I found that I could move maybe 20 packages a weekend, but it was slow, constant work, and I hated it. It would take a year of that work every weekend to ship everything. Eventually, I found a local shipping company that would mail out my product. They sent the first shipment around July of 2017, and they've now shipped hundreds of packages. I still have a few hundred more, but I can get 100 shipments set up in 2 weekends, and then have a few weeks free to work on other parts of the business before they need more shipments again. Recently, I've started working on improvements to the product. I added an important feature to the wireless protocol and translated the design files from an old design program to a newer open source program I now like to work in, KiCad. I started working on this product over 5 years ago, and I'm still not done shipping product to the original backers. It has cost me almost $100,000 of my own money to do this, and I'm still paying off the debt. I had fantasies of investors swooping in with big paychecks so I could work out of a house in Palo Alto with a pool and a barbecue. Instead, I found myself drinking to handle the stress of my funds running out. But fantasies aside, I had another, more concrete goal. I didn't have any idea how to run a business, and I wanted badly to learn. I've wanted to start my own robotics company since I was 11 years old, and I still haven't done it. But I have run a successful Kickstarter campaign and raised $150,000 online. I've designed a really nice wireless board that works with Arduino software and has over 1 kilometer range. I started my own open source business and had over $80,000 worth of hardware manufactured in China. I learned the hard way that you need to be careful with your vendors or they'll substitute a critical part for something out of spec. I learned that you have to test your product as soon as it arrives, not 2 months later. I've also learned how much work it all is. I no longer want to sell 10 different kits with all kinds of add-ons. I will never again make up my pricing, and I will never price things that low. Remember the $20 price point I mentioned? I thought the boards would cost around $12, and I had hoped our $30 premium unit would help compensate for the low profits of the $20 unit. But when all was said and done, these boards cost $19 to make. I did all that work to make no money. I'd later learned from some hardware experts that you really want to price goods like mine around 5x the cost to manufacture. Amazingly, I'd still like to do a Kickstarter again in the future, but I won't do it with a product that isn't designed yet. I'm going to design new products and fund them myself in small batches, selling them on Amazon. If the product works and people like it, Then I can consider Kickstarter. And when I do it, there won't be multiple kit options. There will be a single shipping item. I'll already have a thorough test plan in place with documentation for my vendor to follow. If I do a Kickstarter again, I'll be able to take the money, send it to the vendor, get tested hardware to my door, and then send it to Amazon for fulfillment. I lost $100,000 over 5 years in my first halfway successful venture. But as far as I'm concerned, it's been a success. I had no idea what was going to happen when I started, but I knew I would learn, and learn I have. The business is still going, and I still have people excited to use the product. I'm slowly building a brand I believe I can use for future products. I'm considering now a new product I might be able to start selling on Amazon in maybe a year's time under the Flutter brand. It's been in the works for a long time, but after all the Kickstarter hardware is shipped, I'm going to rebrand Flutter Wireless to Flutter Electronics. My dream is that we'll sell robotics kits. Maybe in another 5 years we'll get there. When I do, I'll finally have realized the dream I've had since I was 11, to run my own robotics company. Thank you.
All right, guys, any questions? I know it's a lot to take in. Take your time.
So, what are you doing now?
So, now every Sunday, except for about the last 2 months when I've been prepping for this trip, I mostly work to check customers' addresses, make sure they're correct. And then I have to pretty manually go through my database to generate packing lists for them. So the customers that email me to tell me that their address is up to date or email me with the corrected address, I'll then go through their order, generate a packing list for it, add that to a batch of orders that I'm going to call one shipment. And then I take a zip file of all the packing lists for each of these customers and a spreadsheet with one line for each customer, make a zip file of that and send that to my shipper. And then I noticed that the $61,000 order was actually short on a couple of items. So I've been working on ordering a little bit more hardware. It's not that expensive, luckily. I need to spend about $1,000 to order some more hardware. So I've been double checking the design files. I haven't manufactured things in several years, and my files are a little bit disorganized, so I want to make sure that I'm manufacturing the correct thing. Specifically, when I ordered this, the thing that I need is a little accessory board. And I placed the order with design files, but then they had questions back and forth, and I was answering the questions over email. So I had to go back through my old email, see what those questions were, and then put them into a document so I could have them officially answered before I placed the order. And then the other thing is I'm getting ready to sell my product on Amazon, and every product on Amazon needs a barcode. So you can pay $250 to buy 10 barcodes from this global barcode database, or you can pay $750 for 100 barcodes. So I'll probably buy 100 barcodes rather than 10. But I recently figured that out before I was setting up the Amazon account. And then the other thing is I'm adding a few features to the product. So the wireless communications right now, when one device sends a message to another device, there's no automatic acknowledgement of the message. But the feature I added was that for every wireless packet that's received, when the receiving device will very quickly send out a very short message back to the transmitter to let it know it got the message. So I'm sort of improving the product on the engineering side. And I just sort of dance between shipping, and a little bit of engineering, and shipping again. I do that every Sunday.
That's just you yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is it, sorry, I'm asking another question.
It's okay.
What is the name of your company or your product?
Flutter Wireless.
Why do you want to rebrand it?
Because I want to sell electronics and robotics kits, not just wireless products. Yeah, and actually, so when the wireless product came out, I said, when I released that product, the reason why I did was that all the companies that sell wireless are these really big companies, and they don't care about hobbyists. And I wanted a company that cares about hobbyists, that would sell wireless products for hobbyists. And I knew there's a lot of regulations in the world about this stuff, but I just said, I'll figure it out. It's okay. I'm not worried about it, like whatever. But actually, I'm nervous about the regulations. So while I will continue to sell the Flutter wireless boards, especially to people in the US and Europe where the regulations are clear, I don't really want to try to actively promote that product too much. So the next product I want to make is a motor controller. So I mentioned on Skittles that the motor controllers are $100 a piece, and I'd like to come out with something that's cheaper and more specifically oriented towards the robots that I'm making. And the cool thing about that is there's no regulations around it, so I can ship them anywhere in the world.
First of all, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
The story is very fascinating. So in this room, there are a lot of electrical engineers, computer science students, right? I just want to know if you have like an electrical engineer and a computer science engineer, which one would find it easier to jump to robotics?
Certainly either. In general, robots have electronics in them. So the electrical engineer can go and do the electronics that the robot needs. The computer science person can go and write the software that the robot needs. In general, software is always easier. Robots need a huge amount of software. So if you'll have mechanical engineers, if you have a robotics team, you might have a bunch of mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, administrators for the team, technicians who are building and repairing the robots, and then out of all of those, you'll have like an equal number of software engineers. So you have more software engineers in a robotics project than electrical. So, it's easy either way. If you're asking about yourself, I would say pursue anything that's interesting. If you're on the fence about either of those, then you'll totally still be able to write the software. I started as a mechanical engineer and then later worked as a full-time robotics software engineer. And now my job is a hardware test engineer, but it's about 80% writing Python.
So you said that in Zen, all these different companies, but then you have contacts in Shenzhen, China,
Yeah.
where they ship back your products after they've been designed.
Yeah.
So how do you handle some issues that can come up in case perhaps someone else instead starts selling products that uses your designs instead in China? Did you try to work a way around it? And if so, if it happens, how can you control it?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. So I used a very reputable vendor in China. So they're a company called Seed Studio, three E's in the word seed. But they're an electronics vendor in China that ships worldwide, and they have a service where they'll manufacture products for people. And if it seems to be a really important part of their business, but if they were to rip people off, then people would stop doing it. So they're a sort of a pretty reputable, a very reputable company out there. The other thing is that the way I work is my goal is always like the most success I can have is if Chinese vendors clone my product. So I want to make the product as accessible in the world and as cheap as possible. And as one person working out of a lab in Silicon Valley, I can't necessarily make things as cheap as a company in China can. So if they can clone my products and sell them for cheaper, that's great. That's why all of my products are open source.
So I guess something, thank you. Something that I guess caught me was like, I guess the part you say that was like your lowest point in your life. And thank you for sharing that, because I think often people don't share that. The highs and lows and like emotional turmoils of entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
It's like you fantasize or like Mark Zuckerberg story.
Yeah.
But the question I have is, in hindsight,
Mm-hmm.
knowing what you now know, what would you have done differently in that period?
Yeah. somebody mentioned that they would have paid me $85 for the product that I charged $20 for. I think that would have been a really good choice. The other thing that I would have done differently is that I had some prototypes that worked. I didn't really like the performance of them. For example, they used a microcontroller that had very little RAM, and I wanted customers to be able to write their own program that ran on the board, but it was also running my wireless library. And so after I wrote my wireless library, there was just very little RAM left for the user's application. I didn't like that, and so I really wanted to redesign the board. And then a new wireless radio came out as well. But I think it might have been good for me to set a lower goal and just try to release the first version that I had, rather than trying to redesign all of it. And then the third thing that I would have done, so I would have charged more money, released the earlier hardware rather than redesigning it. And then the third thing that I would have done is not offer so many options. So shipping is not to be underestimated as far as how much of your effort it takes. So if you just have one configuration that you're shipping, it's way easier.
I guess, sorry, maybe I have to add on, because I think that's one of the business side, right?
Yeah.
I'm also interested in your, like, what your leadership or personal life.
Yeah. Well, it was, in hindsight, definitely a mistake to tell my girlfriend that she could quit her job and I would pay for her salary so that we could work together. That didn't even last very long, and it caused a lot of stress. And it cost a good deal of money while I was paying for expenses, and seemed totally the wrong way to go. Yeah.
And then at some point you talked of family, talked of your dad and then mom.
Yeah.
So how did they relate with your idea of you trying to go to college and focus on another passion about?
Yeah.
How did you handle that, and how did they feel?
They were not happy about it. My grandfather, who had paid for my college, was particularly unhappy about it. I think he didn't want to talk to me for a few months. It's pretty understandable. I think my mom had probably learned that I was going to do whatever I was going to do. If I decide I'm going to do something and I think it's justified, I'll probably do it. So I know that both of my parents were unhappy that I was going to drop out, but the other thing is I hadn't told them until I had long since been dropping classes or not attending them, and they probably also didn't realize how deep of a hole I was in. Anyway, they were unhappy, but I'm a pretty independent person, so I was going to do it anyway.
So you said something about using robotics to make lives free, or everything free, something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yesterday, yeah. Yeah.
Is that it? Correctly?
Hmm?
Is it like using robotics to make everything free?
Well, I would like to encourage people in the world to understand that we could, right now, if you need a product, somebody else has to make it, and sort of they have to pay for it, and there's always a built-in human labor cost in almost everything we have. But if we just automate everything, we pretty much just need to feed things electricity. You still have to get raw materials. But I'm an advocate of the idea that we intentionally automate the things that people need for survival and happiness. So, I don't really care if we make Coca-Cola free, but bottled water would probably be, or water filters maybe, or something like that. Like making all of this stuff accessible to everybody in the world. It's just, I think, a good idea. Yeah, and certainly it seems to me very achievable to make a world where we don't need to charge anyone for food. So, for example, where I work at Google X, part of the Google family, they sort of, the way Google sees it, it makes sense to just make sure everybody's well fed, because they're going to be happier, they're going to be doing better, and that's better for Google. And I think that that applies to the whole world. If everybody's well fed, I think the world would be better off. And certainly we have the resources. I mean, I really do believe that we have the resources to feed everyone. But sometimes we arrange things such that a few individuals really take most of the resources. And I think we should probably stop doing that.
What other domains other than agriculture we could like 100% follow?
Well, so the construction of shelter, the clothing, the manufacture of clothing could be automated. That's a tricky one because clothing is a little tough, but I think in the next 20 years, clothing will be fully automated. There are already business interests to fully automate things, but they do it a little differently. If you wanted to make something that was sort of a socialist utopia, you wouldn't do things in the same way as the capitalists will do it. So some people say we should just sit back and wait because the capitalists will automate everything. But they'll do so in a way that allows them to extract revenue out of everything, because that's how capitalist businesses work. But unfortunately, extracting revenue out of everything means that you can't make everything free. Cool.
I'm going to go to the very basic question.
Yeah.
Why is it called Flutter?
So Flutter is first and foremost the name of the wireless protocol. So Flutter is a lightweight wireless protocol. And so it goes through the air, and when I say lightweight, I mean it doesn't take a lot of code, and so it's lightweight and it goes through the air, so it sort of flutters.
So you talked about your product before.
Yeah.
You talked.
Yeah.
I wasn't here. It's fine, I'll learn.
Oh no, I haven't talked much about Flutter. I don't actively promote Flutter because it's just plenty of work just to ship it to the people who've already ordered it. So.
You want to finish off with them and then after that just start marketing it?
Yeah, I'd keep it a secret if I could. But no, I mean, I'm really happy with what I made. I finally did make a product that I'm really proud of. I mean, not completely. I really think that the right product needs more software, and I probably will never make the software that I think would really make it right. But I am at least pleased with the hardware design. I think it looks really good. It works really well. It's much nicer to support this product than the early prototype. So, yeah.
What are some of the accessories that people are asking for?
Yeah. So there's my favorite accessories for Flutter is the Flutter Explorer. And this is a little board with all kinds of plugs on it. It has 3 MOSFET switches on it. It has a buzzer. It has a plug that will fit 4 old school servo connectors. So you could move 4 servo motors, or you could power 4 hobby brushless motor controllers. So you could make a quadcopter with it. And then it also has a plug for I2C or SPI communications and other digital and analog inputs. So you could plug in a gyroscope and a GPS and 4 brushless motors, and you could make a drone using the Explorer board, for example. It also has a DC power jack, and that power jack is hooked up to the 3 MOSFETs. So you could also use it to control 3 solenoid motors. So you could open solenoid valves, or you could have a solenoid that hooks up to a gate. You can make a remote gate control. Yeah.
Also, would you be willing to sell your company if a big company came and said, "Here's a lot of money, we like what you do"?
I mean, if somebody wanted to give me a lot of money, I would consider it, certainly. I mean, yeah. But it doesn't really make a lot of sense because Flutter is just me. And so, I mean, if somebody wanted to pay me to keep doing Flutter, that would be fine. But for the most part, big companies aren't trying to do things the way I'm doing them. And really my goal with Flutter is to keep going. Like I said, keep going for another 5 years. And I'm 33 now. And my hope is that, I told my mother this recently, that hopefully by the time I'm 40, I'll learn how to make a profit from my business. And then that would mean that in my 40s, hopefully, and this is the goal and what I'm trying to work towards, that I could work for myself and still make as much money as I could make working for a tech company. I really don't like driving to the same office every day. It just sucks. So if I could work for myself, that would be great. But if somebody were to buy my company, now I'd be working for them, and I wouldn't be able to direct it in the way that I need to make it my working for myself. However, if there was a really big paycheck attached to it, then I would just use that money instead to achieve the same goal.
So you say success for you looks like, the Chinese cloning your products.
Mm-hmm.
But then how will you make money when that happens?
I'll make new things. So there's lots of things that need to be made for robots. So, my goal, as I talked about it yesterday, is a world where robots are very inexpensive and they're totally open source, so they're not encumbered with intellectual property. And so I know that robots need a good wireless connection, so I made that board. The next thing I'm making is a motor controller. There are other boards that robots need, so advanced sensors or a motherboard that can control all the power necessary would be really nice. It would just force me to innovate to some extent. The other thing is that there is actually room to sell both first-party, high-quality brands coming from a US vendor that uses US or European, anywhere, you're just a vendor that cares about their product. Whereas some of the clones can be of questionable quality. And so there are businesses, for example, that wouldn't mess around with buying clones. They would still buy first-party items. So the Prusa i3 printer that I mentioned yesterday is a great example. It's totally open source, and the clones, there are more clones shipped in the world than there are official Prusas. But they sold $7 million of stuff in the last few months and have 200 employees. So they're actually able to coexist. And I guess that's also part of the answer. Yeah. But Prusa does innovate. And so, for example, we had the Mark II, and then the Mark IIS, and now the Mark III. And the vendors are always a little behind. And so I love engineering this stuff. Doing this isn't... designing better robots for people who love to make robots is not a burden for me. And so I will keep rolling. And as I keep rolling, I'll have the latest version, and I'll release the latest version. And my competitive advantage is that I'll have everything first. Everybody else will be playing catch up and following. So I can use that advantage, I think, to fund a small lifestyle business that at least can pay for me and hopefully at some point some employees.
How did you learn about
I was at work, and I got an email from our team admin, and it turns out that the guy who runs our project, whose name is Hans Peter, had met Fred at a Silicon Valley party of some kind, and had invited Fred to Google for to have kind of a more formal meeting where they could talk in more detail about what Fred is doing. So our team admin sent out an email and said, HP is going to be meeting with this guy Fred, and I had a YouTube video showing about ALU. And I'd written an essay on my personal blog about 2 years ago where I was really frustrated with the fact that all of the jobs in Silicon Valley for robotics are basically doing things to help out rich people. And selfie drones is my canonical example of something that it's fine if you want a selfie drone, but it's not like having a significant impact on the world in the way that I'd like to. That was literally a job posting that I found at the time when I was writing this essay. It was selfie drones, but also military applications or robots for wealthy parents who can afford educational robots that public schools can't afford, but wealthy parents can, so their kids can have an edge. And I really, really see that robots can help the world's poor in fabulous ways. I really want to work on that. So when I saw that Fred was talking about leadership in Africa just from the YouTube video, I knew I had to attend the meeting. And when I attended the meeting, I listened to Fred for an hour and was just fascinated with what he had to say and his vision. I really genuinely think that Fred has an excellent vision, and I'm thrilled that you all here are working with ALU and being part of it. At the end of the meeting, Fred said, if anybody wants to come out and come out for a week or two and meet everybody, you're welcome to come. And I jumped on the opportunity.
trying to have, not trying, but going to have your company, promising your mom,
Yeah.
in your booties, something like
Wouldn't call it a promise, but I said that's my aspiration.
Oh yeah, so have you been able to work on your business aspects other than the tech side? Because you spoke about it saying you're not so familiar with
Yeah.
business plans.
Yeah.
How far are you in terms of catching up the business side?
Yeah, so I'm definitely not doing any work right now to develop the business further beyond satisfying existing orders. So I'm still basically playing catch up. Now, I do have a better understanding as far as what the expenses are of a business, what those sort of things are. I definitely still, and so the product I want to make, the motor controller, was something where, as I said, I'm going to just make a few of something with my own money and put it on Amazon. So there's not a lot of risk. If nobody buys it, that's okay. I wouldn't do a Kickstarter unless people were already buying them and I already had customers that liked it. So it's a pretty small thing to do that. As far as bigger stuff, like bigger picture business stuff, that's an area I still just don't really have any experience or expertise in. So it might be good for me at some point to meet a business partner that was interested in working with me. That's really tough because I'm just very particular about having a personal vision for things. So I might be happier with only a meagerly, I might be happier with only a somewhat successful business that at least does exactly what I want, even if I just have to keep working in tech in order to pay for it. But once I'm out from under the commitments from Flutter, I may consider, partnering with people on other ventures because there is so much going on that's worthwhile in the world. I don't actually just have to do hobbyist robotics. I could do something very different, and then I would really benefit from working with a business-minded person who can take on that, so that I can just focus on the technical aspects, which is really my strong suit.